NATO is no longer about mutual self-defense. NATO is now on the verge of transitioning into an offensive force that could literally, by choice, take on a course of action that would lead to World War III. We could choose a war of choice, not defending ourselves, but provoking and prompting a war that we should not fight and cannot win. And if we go down this path far enough, it could end up going nuclear, and then everybody loses. Listen, we are on a path right now, while Trump is trying to get this war negotiated to an end and getting the war off the table and getting the killing to stop and starting the process of rebuilding Europe and getting some sort of European-wide architecture. He deserves a lot of credit for trying to go down that path, but he is being blocked at every case by European leaders who do not want peace with Russia, who do not want to end the Russia-Ukraine war, but to prepare and set up a force so that later on they can fight a war against Russia itself. We are right now doing zero effort to find mutual understanding with Russia to get this over, zero effort to de-escalate tensions, and zero willingness or ability to try and bring the war to an end. Instead, we are completely ignoring reality. We do not even want to look at what's actually happening on the ground. Doesn't matter what anybody says, thinks, or wants. Doesn't matter what's actually happening. We are taking action at the highest levels now, at the highest levels, state levels and NATO level, to lay the groundwork for a war with Russia. And we are rejecting and ejecting any other possibilities at having the war come to an end. If you think that that's an exaggeration, if you think that I'm making an unfair characterization, then listen today to the words of Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary General. He made a speech today, which was a profound policy statement. This is not just some comment that he made off the cuff. This was a very carefully, deliberately crafted speech that has nugget after nugget after nugget that makes abundantly clear, crystal clear, both to Europeans and to Russians, that NATO is preparing for war with Russia. This is where the law of consequences will come into play, a law that we have ignored to our peril, that we think that we can do whatever we want and there will be no consequences. As I'm going to show you here, we have profoundly proven that's not the case, that when you take actions, there will be counteractions, and most of the time it's going to be things that we don't like. But we have ignored all of these lessons, these painful lessons that have occurred up to this point, and I fear if we don't do something quick and hard and pivot from where we are now, we could get into a situation where the final proof of the foolishness and the absurdity of our actions is a mushroom cloud somewhere. And once one happens, it doesn't matter who started it. It doesn't matter who launched the first one or where it struck. Then the chances are going to be great that both sides will be burned up, whether it's a mutually assured destruction or only some kind of catastrophic nuclear strike on either side remains to be seen. It almost doesn't matter, because it would be horrific no matter what. The only way we can avoid that outcome then is to somehow belatedly get sanity in right now. And right now, I think the only possibility that we have is for Donald Trump to man up and become that 800-pound gorilla and take action, because genuinely, there's no other source. There's no other possibility for where this could come. He must take this action, or NATO will drag us all into World War III. Let's take a look. Now, what I'm going to show you here, and I've just selected pieces. This is only about a 17-minute speech. Not very long at all, but profound in its number. And actually, we're going to put the link to the whole thing. I'm going to show you some sound bites, but I want to give you the chance. You watch the whole thing yourself, and you can come to whatever conclusions you want. As you know, I don't like to take things, or I don't take things out of character, or I don't take them out of context. And as a matter of fact, we have pretty long sound bites. So you see, people get a chance to say what they want. That's going to be the case here again today, and I'm going to put it in context. And I'm also going to bring into effect things that weren't in there that he doesn't want you to know that are profoundly important as well. First of all, if you're going to get into a situation where you want to draw us into a war that clearly we don't need to fight right now, you got to do several things. You're going to have to exaggerate threats. You're going to have to outright lie. And probably one of the first things you got to do is you must demonize the opponent. Just think back to what we've done in the past with the Iraqi war. We had to demonize Saddam Hussein and all this. We're really good at that. But let's get into what we do here. So Mark Rutte will go right off the bat to demonize Russia even more.
The dark forces of oppression are on the march again. I'm here today to tell you where NATO stands and what we must do to stop a war before it starts. And to do that, we need to be crystal clear about the threat. We are Russia's next target. And we are already in harm's way.
Okay, so you got to demonize Russia. Dark forces are on their way. And then you have to exaggerate and lie. He does all three of those in one soundbite right there. So he says that Russia is only after conquest and they are coming for us. We are their targets. There is no evidence that we are Russia's targets. Why would Russia want to do that? This is not like Hitler in 1938, 1939, on the verge of war, and then into 1940, where he had written the Mein Kampf, and he had talked about his aspirations. He had already taken over Czechoslovakia. He'd already had the Anschluss in Austria. He'd already shown that he had continental desires. And then he attacks into Poland. Then he attacks into France. So we knew he had laid it out. He had threats against the continents. He had a force to make it happen. And critically, there were no nuclear weapons at that time. So he had a chance to make good on it. None of those things are existing today. There is no path for Russia to conventionally replicate Hitler, even if Putin actually wanted to. He doesn't. He has been, emphatic and consistent in saying that's not what we want. And even if you don't want to don't even listen to him for this one. Don't take his word for anything. Why should you, right? Why should you do that? Don't put your security in hoping someone does what they say. But as I tell you all the time, you have to listen to what somebody says and then see what the actions are. And then you can see whether there is any room for actually trusting them or not. Russia has consistently said they don't want to do anything. They don't have any interest in going and attacking anything other than Ukraine, which they did emphatically say is an exception for the very specific reason of NATO coming into it, which, of course, we've talked about is going from 2007 all the way up through. Really, you can go back to 1997 when the first round of NATO expansion started. That started the aggravation, but it didn't get to a really fever pitch until 2007. From that time forward, especially 2008 forward, when we said Ukraine was coming into NATO, that kind of lit the fuse. And then a bunch of stuff happened in between that, which we've talked about ad nauseum. That's the bottom line. That's why Russia has gone here. But you see that prior to 2014, when the Civil War started and we supported the overthrow of the legally elected government that was friendly to Moscow, we didn't like that. We didn't want to let democracy take its place. We didn't want the people to have their choice. No, we had to insert ourselves in that and undermine it so that we took our own efforts and moved it into it. That started the Civil War in Ukraine, which Russia supported their ethnic brethren in the country, but they did not move our armored forces in there. They didn't go to war then. They supported those folks. They sent them lots of money, ammunition, weapons, tanks, all kinds of stuff. So they did send them a lot of help on that, but they did not go to war because what they wanted to do was to stop the fighting. Ergo, that's why they agreed to get into the ceasefire and then go into the Minsk agreements. And they were a guarantor to that, along with allegedly France and Germany. We see how that worked out. That's what Russia wanted. So they did not take military action after that. Now, there is no reason why. Again, getting back to don't trust anybody's word, you guys got to look at the logic of it. What possible motivation would Russia have to expand and go and attack anybody anywhere else outside of Ukraine? They have all the energy that they need in their country. They have all the raw materials and natural resources that they need inside their country. They have all of the food production and these, massive amounts of farmland and everything else to completely be self-sustaining if they needed to. There is nothing to gain from going outside to try and recreate and conquer anything else. All it would do would be this massive, amazing headache. And something that they couldn't win. They would benefit nothing from. One of the lessons learned from the Soviet Union is how all of these satellite countries were a massive drain on Moscow, which helped to create the edifice that collapsed in 1991. They don't want to repeat that when they see that they have a good, firm control of what they have in the Russian Federation and that they can continue indefinitely living at peace within their borders. So there's no reason for them to go. But don't look at any logic if you're Mark Rutte. Mark Rutte does not want you to do that. He wants you to follow his claims and just these statements that there's this dark force coming, etc., when everything that Russia has been saying and doing since then has said they want this war off the table, they want a negotiated settlement, etc. We've rejected all of that. But Mark Rutte doesn't want to go down that path. In fact, don't listen to that at all. According to him, you want to move forward. Now, the next thing he's going to show is that Russia represents a brazen threat.
This year, Russia has become even more brazen, reckless and ruthless towards NATO and towards Ukraine. During the Cold War, President Reagan warned about the aggressive impulses of an evil empire. Today, President Putin is in the empire-building business again. He is throwing everything he has at Ukraine, killing soldiers and civilians, destroying the havens of humanity, homes, schools, and hospitals.
Oh boy, here we go. You want to trot out Ronald Reagan, the evil empire. That's what you want to focus on, the evil empire. Yeah, and then now here's Putin. More on him in just a second. But let's stick with Ronald Reagan since you brought that up. Who was it? Ronald Reagan is the one that said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Remember that? And then he talked to Gorbachev. And then they ended up having a literal friendship. They didn't just work together. They became actual friends. And then we had all kinds of nuclear arms reductions, the lowering of tensions, etc., because Reagan was willing to talk to the Russians. He was willing to find mutual ground. He was willing to have a win-win situation. That's the example you want to follow. Don't just stop on the evil empire. That's what Reagan said at the beginning of his reign when he wanted to have military buildup and all this stuff, and he used that as justification, etc. Now, that was at the time we were actually in a Cold War, and so there was some justification for what he was saying at that time. But you see, he didn't stay there. You see, Reagan didn't want to get a big military to use it. He wanted to have a military actually not to use it. Now, Mark Rutte used that language a second ago. He said, we want to have this war so we don't have to fight it. Only when you look at all the rest of his actions, that's not what he wants to do. He wants to freaking use it. And so he's going to now go into more of the lies. He said, Putin is now in the empire building world. He's now in the habit and the operations of building an empire. Where? Where is Russia building any kind of a freaking empire? They're not doing anything of the sort. The only thing that they have done so far is in the Donbass area, and then now in these 4 regions that they annexed in 2022, where all of the Russian ethnic people live. So this is about the people who are ethnic Russians right now. And if we had agreed to the deal that was on the table you could go back to 2021, but for sure 2022, or even the one in 2024, that's it. That's where it would have stopped. That was on the table. It would have been over. But no, we can't have that. No, ignore all that. Ignore all the facts where the Russians wanted to end the war and had something on the table that had limits on it. No, we don't want to say that. We want to say he's in the empire building. Do you know what an empire even is? I mean, it's like the British Empire, where they went abroad and conquering all these countries. It was even what we did in our hemisphere in the early part of our country, where we went to Cuba, to the Philippines, etc. We went all over the place. We had an empire. France had an empire. Spain had an empire. Where is the Russian Empire? What countries have they gone abroad and conquered? What countries are they trying to go abroad and conquer? None. They're trying to get the one on the border off the table. They're trying to prevent it from coming in at all. And they tried in 2014. They tried in 2015. They tried in 2021 to prevent war from coming at all by having a deal that they could live with on their border. Just like we would do. Just like any superpower would do. They wanted to have their security without going to war. And they tried to go to war. We would not have it. So Mark Rutte is not the first, but now he's trying to go further than anybody else by literally talking about a military buildup with the express target of Moscow. We talked about there that he thinks that there's this war that could go on, that we could have a conflict. I think that, and remember here, I wish I had pulled this up. You remember we've shown you about a month and a half or so ago where Emmanuel Macron mocked Russia and said he's only taken 1% of the territory in the last 2 years of Ukraine. He ain't that bad. You remember General Jack Keane, same thing. He's mocking Russia. They've only taken 1%. Okay, how is it that they can only take 1% in 2 years of fighting, but now then they're going to be an empire building? Do you see what I'm saying? It's obviously lies. But listen, I think that too much in the West, and Mark Rutte, I think they actually think that Russia's doing, I think you said it a second ago, they're holding nothing back. They're doing everything they can to conquer this part of Ukraine. And they've only taken 1%. So I think he's believing that's all they've done because that's all they can do. Now, Putin tried to lay out the foundation and said, fellas, y'all need to understand that ain't all we can do.
I've said that 100 times. We have no plans of fighting against Europe. But if Europe wants to fight and if they start this fight, then we are ready right now. There is no doubt about this. But the only question is, if Europe starts the war, unleashes this war, because that's not Ukraine. With Ukraine, we use some surgical means. We are trying to be really careful. Because you understand why. This is not a war in the direct sense of the word. And Europe, all of a sudden, wants to start a war. And if it does start a war, then very rapidly there might be a situation where we have no one to negotiate with.
There is no doubt, there should be no doubt, that what Russia is doing in what they call a special military operation inside of Ukraine is limited. It is definitely limited. The fact that all of these power ministries still stand to this day in Kiev are proof positive of that. The fact that they made their initial incursions in 5 different axes of advance in the initial phase of this operation and only had about 50,000 in the Kiev one shows for sure that they did not intend on conquering the place, but that they wanted to show this power that couldn't be resisted, or at least that was the intent, that shows that they couldn't be resisted, and so that they would have a negotiated settlement, which nearly worked, because you see, they went into Ukraine on the 24th of February, 2022, and just 2 or 3 weeks later, they were engaged in negotiations in Istanbul. Zelensky himself had said he's willing to negotiate, is willing to have neutrality, all that stuff. They were this close to actually having a deal that would have ended the war then, because that was what Russia's objective was. What Russia was not prepared to do, as I've said many times, is to have a plan B, that if Ukraine didn't do that and they moved in and ignored, and Ukraine decided to fight a war, then Russia was screwed. And so it was. And it took them better part of 2 years to actually get to a point to where they could actually sustain a long-term conflict. And that's why they spent I guess after the first 6th month or so, they spent digging defenses, etc. Well, they've learned from that. And now then they are in a much, much better position. And so what they have done over time is, based on all the things that we've been told, even by open Western media, by the Ukrainians themselves, the Ukraine special forces and intelligence services, that Russia now has a substantial defense industrial production capability. Interestingly enough, if you look at the amount of weapons and ammunition that they're reported to have produced, the rate at which they're producing, you look at the rate at which they're using, it is very clear that only a small portion of that is being used on a daily basis. There is a lot, especially in the drones, in the artillery, glide bombs, air power, et cetera. There's a pretty high density of those going on at the front line. But you don't see hardly any more a lot of armor, but a lot of that is still being produced. You don't see a lot of the troops going in. You don't see large numbers of troops going in, but you do see large numbers of troops being trained. You don't see a large number of even the long-range drones and the missiles. You see periodically, like overnight, there was another barrage, but it was only like 50 missiles, I think. It was like nearly 600 or so drones, but there were only about 50 missiles. Well, they're producing missiles apparently at a much higher rate than that, and they're allegedly producing these long-range drones at near 1,000 per day. And when you see them only using 600 in one day, and then they may go several not, what does that tell you? It tells you is that they're stockpiling these things somewhere else. The number of artillery shells has stabilized, but the number of production has gone up. So that tells you that they are stockpiling large quantities of these things. Now, at the same time, we continue to get rid of all of our stuff. Now, we have expanded production. Mark Rutte claimed that one factory in Germany was producing up to 350,000 shells per year, which is not a minor number for one factory. And however much they're doing over the rest of the entire Western Alliance is unknown. They didn't talk about that one, but it's going up. But it's still not a fraction. And allegedly, according to Rutte about 3 months ago, it's 1/3. 1/3. Now, I doubt there's been a material change in that amount of time, especially since Russia's still accelerating. So what that tells you is that if we get into a war with Russia, they have a lot of armor that they can use, and they can swamp fields. They have lots of missiles that are not been used anywhere, that they can saturate areas, and they have lots of air defense missiles. Another thing that they're stockpiling on their side, and we don't know how many Oreshniks they have, but there's nothing that can be done to stop that. If Russia went on a full-on war, Putin's not just blowing smoke there. He's being honest that they can do a lot more. And if you think that we can fight the war like Ukraine is, and that things can go slow and be nice and, an easy pace that we can handle, and we can just do inches and increments here and there, you are setting us up for disaster. Don't do it. One of the other things that I think they're looking at here is Mark Rutte is talking about one of the ways he thinks they can actually conduct this, and that is to wear out Russia. And they're looking at this war here, and they're thinking, man, these guys are losing a lot of guys per day. And if I can just pull my calculator out here and add up some numbers every day, man, that's a lot. And Russia, as many people as they do have some limitations. Here's how he put it.
While Putin is trying to destroy Ukraine, he is also devastating his own country. There have been over 1.1 million Russian casualties since he began his war in 2022. And this year, Russia has lost, on average, 1,200 troops a day. Think about that. More than 1 million casualties so far, and 1,200 a day killed or wounded this year alone. Putin is paying for his pride with the blood of his own people. And if he is prepared to sacrifice ordinary Russians in this way, what is he prepared to do to us?
Oh, that's so nice that he's so worried about Russia wasting its manpower and killing its own people in its defense. That's touching that he's actually concerned about the Russians. Obviously, he could care nothing about the Russians. But what he's saying there is that he thinks that they are losing a lot of people. And so that is, you talk about something dark. I think that that's one of the things that's motivating many of the Western European supporters of the war in Ukraine. They have no concern with how many Ukrainians die. You talk about somebody who doesn't care about their people. They certainly don't care about the Ukrainian people, but they're going, all this stuff we're sending in there, man, that's killing a lot of Russians. Now, I've told you, I think that that many of the intelligence people, and certainly a lot of the Ukrainian intelligence, is intentionally spreading misinformation to decision makers in the West. And it is at least possible that Mark Rutte believes what he says there about this casualty rate. He may think that is how much Russia is losing. It shouldn't. It's embarrassing that he can't look and just see on the ground with physical evidence that that's unlikely, that it's like almost certain a gross exaggeration. But he, nevertheless, though, if he somehow has bought into this fiction that apparently a lot of Western intelligence services are spreading around to their own decision makers to deceive them, that's another problem that we'll discuss in another video someday. But that's what he may be thinking, why they want to keep going, because every day the war goes on, they think that there's more and more Russians dying. Now, if you think that that's a crazy idea, he's not the only one that thinks it. And in fact, or I guess it was last Friday, General Syrskyi of Ukraine said that's actually their strategy.
Our strategy is to exhaust the Russian army as much as possible, prevent its advance, hold our territory, while simultaneously striking the enemy in the near rear, the operational depth, the deeper, into Russia itself, with the aim of undermining its defense capability and industrial capacity. All of this is what the enemy has been using against us. By doing so, through selective offensive actions, we maintain the operational initiative, and despite having fewer troops and resources, we prevent further Russian advances.
Okay, for those who may see, Gary, if you can throw the link to this in the description here as well. we did a breakdown on that entire interview with Syrskyi from last week. We did it on Monday, I believe it was. And one of the things we pointed out there is that is insane. It is insane for the little country here to think you're going to exhaust the bigger country here when everything that you can count shows that you're running out of stuff here and that they're increasing over there. And I won't go through all the stuff. You can watch that video for the breakdown on that particular point there. But the point being that the mentality and the support from the European nations and NATO in particular, that they're endorsing this strategy and that they think it's going to win, that is so dangerous, because what if they believe it? Now, I'm thinking that that's just something that they're saying, and it's just, I don't know, eyewash, that they want people to believe that that's what they're doing, that if you think that we're killing Russians, you may clap and say, yay, keep going, etc. But what if they actually believe it? And those are the guys that are making policies on whether we do or don't go to war. And they're making their assessments based on how many Russian casualties they have. And somehow you think that if you increase the number of Russian casualties to something higher than apparently what it is, that Russia will just say, oh, darn, well, bummer. I didn't know it was going to cost this much. Let's just quit and go home and let the Ukraine side and the European side do whatever they want. That's beyond absurd. It's outlandish. It's insane to actually predicate policies and strategies on something that is so far disconnected from reality that it beggars belief that anybody that's intelligent these days can actually make those kinds of assessments. And yet you see it right there before you. This is not anything I'm exaggerating or making up. These words are coming out of his mouth and these actions are following from his speech. That's where we are. That's why this is so dangerous, that these kind of men are actually in charge. We got to do something to get this fixed. More on that in a minute. But let's continue on here, because if all of that if I ended the video right here, you would be left with almost no way you could conclude anything other than these guys are crazy. Mark Rutte is leading us down a path of self-destruction, and we got to stop it now. If we ended there, unfortunately, we're not, because that wasn't the end of the speech. Now he's saying it's not enough that we need to go after Russia. If we're going to fight this war, we got to be ready. We got to be prepared to fight also their enablers.
And how is Putin able to continue his war against Ukraine? The answer is China. China is Russia's lifeline. China wants to prevent its ally from losing in Ukraine. Without China's support, Russia could not continue to wage this war. For example, about 80% of critical electronic components in Russian drones and other systems are made in China. So when civilians die in Kiev or Kharkiv, Chinese technology is often inside the weapons that kill them. And let's not forget that Russia also relies on North Korea and Iran in its fight against freedom.
So China, Iran, North Korea. We got to bring them into the fold, folks. If we're going to go to war with Russia, we got to be ready to fight everybody. So how do you think that's going to work out? Now a couple of factual issues that I need to bring out first about his claim there. Gary, I forgot to ask you at the beginning, did we get that full screen up, the one that I sent? Yeah, if you could toss that up there as soon as you get it. Let's actually take a look at what China is actually doing. He said that the only reason that Russia can keep this going in this war is because of these components that it gets from China for its drone operations. And there is definitely some truth to that, because evidence shows that, in fact, the Chinese have been helping with Russia, providing things on the open market. It doesn't appear that there's any coerced or coordinated direct specific military funding for the Ukraine, for the Russian war effort from China, but it's on the open market. But what also is on the open market, and you see the headlines right there, Ukraine Zelensky says that Western parts are found in Russian drones and missiles. And a lot of stuff from, look at that, US and UK. What a shock that is, that our components have been helping Russia's drone efforts. But oops, look to the right there. China is a key factor in Russia's surging? No, Ukraine's surging drone. They're playing both sides. They're saying, hey, I'm just going to put this stuff out there on the market, whoever uses it. So you see, here we're circling right back around to where we were a second ago when I told you He's lying to you. He is intentionally misidentifying information. He's manipulating information that does exist, exaggerating other things, and just flat out lying. He wants you to believe that China is helping Russia win the war, and he's blind. He's not unaware. He can't be. He is definitely, if he reads, he's not unaware. I just put it out there right there for you to see. So he knows that China is actually helping both sides in there. China is doing some things for Russia, but to say that they're keeping Russia propped up is a flat lie. And so by doing this, he's demonizing. And by the way, Iran is helping Russia a lot, actually, with a lot of these drones. They started off with the Garins, and now then Russia has had 2 iterations further with the Garin 1 and now the Garin 2 with the jet engine, etc. Apparently, a lot of Iran still provides a lot of drone components and maybe even factories. So that does exist. But why does that exist? Did that exist before? That exists before West bragged about how 50 nations, nearly all of the NATO countries, have banded together month after month to help Ukraine kill Russians and provide all kinds of weapons, ammunition, know-how, intelligence, training, etc. We brag about it every day. What a surprise that there's a reaction from it, that Russia is going to look to its friends, North Korea, Iran, and to get whatever they can from China. And by the way, I'll tell you, Russia didn't get a fraction from China what they actually wanted. They wanted outright support. China didn't even give Russia diplomatic support. China continues to say, we want to negotiate a settlement. We want this war to be over with. And they're not taking anyone's overt side. They're definitely not going on Russia. They're maintaining friendly relations with Russia that are members of BRICS, and they have interest in balancing off the Western world, especially the United States. So they're staying close. I mean, they say they have a really close friendship, but it does not exert into a military alliance, which is what he's implying that it does there. And why would you want to go there? Okay, look at the military capabilities of UK, France, and Germany. Altogether, I think that they're altogether somewhere around 500,000 total members of the military on active forces. Total. That includes enablers, training people, logistics folks, supply folks, whatever. When you're talking about actual trigger pullers, you're talking this minuscule number. I bet it's not more than 150,000 all total together. Allegedly, and according to the BBC just a couple of days ago, Gary put this up there a bit, that showed that the UK would be lucky if it could get a brigade into combat in short order. And that if they went to an unexpected and no-notice war, they could fight for a few weeks. Okay, that's where we are. Now, if that's the case, and you see that Russia has 1.5 million active troops by itself, why would you want to talk about having this war against Russia and then also point out, yeah, but we also have to be ready to have a conflict with China and North Korea and Iran? Why would you want to do that? I mean, do you realize that to actually have, let's hypothetically say you could take nuclear weapons out of the equation for the moment and it would stay conventional. You can't, but work with me here. How many troops do you think that the West would have to have? How much ammunition and ammunition production capability to sustain, I'm talking about, armored vehicles, tanks, armored personnel carriers, all kinds of other categories of weapons. You would have to have boots, uniforms, I mean, you name it, all kinds of sustainment, pay. I mean, everything. Can you imagine how much you'd have to have? If you have anything less than 1.5 million, among those three I'm talking about, then you'd have to have an equivalent number around the rest of NATO too. You can't possibly even think that you're going to have a war with Russia if they have 1.5 million and you've got whatever it is, 100,000, 150,000 trigger pullers who don't have any experience. You can't do it. Why then go down the path here? Why not say, hey, you know what would be really a good idea here? Let's get this war off the table. Let's end this war here right now as fast as we possibly can, and we'll get whatever we can for the Ukraine side. But what we really need to do is get this war off the table and then start taking care of our own self here. And then let's make sure that our economies can handle this, and then maybe we can, make something bigger if you can sell it to your publics, etc. But if you even think that you're going to have this war later on, you've got to do something now. You can't do what Russia did, which is get into a conflict and then try and spend a couple of years. You won't last a couple of years because Russia now is at that level. They weren't at that level in February 2024. It took them 2 years to get there. Now they're there. So if you get sucked into a war with Russia, then you won't make it that far, my friend. Because, and of course, then if the West starts losing, France and UK both have their own nuclear weapons. They don't have to rely on the United States. And the threat is going to be there to use them. It's going to be there. And that's why I say it is suicidal to even talk about an actual conventional war with Russia, because if you fail, the chances are that you're going to use nuclear weapons to deter the other side. And if you succeeded, which you can't, but hypothetically, let's just go down that path. And if Russia was starting to lose, then they would. You see what I'm saying? It's logical. It's rational. What he's talking about is the opposite of logic and ration. And let's go down to the next one, because there's one more issue here. And that was that he's saying, listen, imagine what would happen if Putin wins.
Just imagine if Putin got his way. Ukraine under the boot of Russian occupation. His forces pressing against a longer border with NATO and a significantly increased risk of an armed attack against us. It would require a truly gargantuan shift in our deterrence and defense. NATO would have to substantially increase its military presence along the eastern flank. And allies would have to go much further and faster on defense spending and production. In such a scenario, we would long for the days when 3.5% of GDP on core defense was enough.
Exactly. In that day, if we have this clash where we're like on each other's borders and we're on the precipice of a strike, and especially if he said elsewhere in that speech, it was like 5 years from now. Let's say that somehow we avoided any conflict between now and then, but here in that 5 years, we're right on the cusp of it. Everybody's bigger, everybody's ready to go, and we're long for the day when we only spent 3.5% GDP. Why in God's name would we want to be there? Were we there on February 21st, February 23rd, 2022? Why not? Why weren't we there? Was there a risk of Russian attack that we had to defend against? Nope. So why do we want to keep prosecuting this war now? A war that can't be won, a war that will literally precipitate the very outcome he just said he fears. What if? You are guaranteeing that will happen, that there will be a Russia on, because you refuse to have any negotiated settlement. So the only path, you are leaving Russia, the only one, not negotiations, you will not have a negotiated settlement. And so the only one left to Russia is a military conquest, however far they decide to go. So had we done the same thing in 2014, and just let democracy have its way and let the people have their say of Ukraine, and they elected who they elected, Ukraine would be whole today. Nobody would be dead. Crimea would still belong to Kiev. That's what would have happened. That is a fact, because from 1991 up until that election, that forestalled the democratic election, Russia was content to let things go. Let things go as the policies went, as the people voted. They didn't get in the way, and they didn't stop anything that happened before that time. But when we inserted ourselves, that started a chain reaction. And then we had to the Minsk agreements, and we didn't want to follow that. And it's very well chronicled how France and Germany especially said, we only did that to get the fighting there on the Civil War basically stopped and turned onto that line of contact, the trench warfare, while we built up the Ukraine military. So now then they're ready actually on February 2022. So that's what we did then. And then we had this chance in 2021 to prevent the war again. Another draft treaty that Russia said, we can still avoid a war here. They told us privately, and Stoltenberg has now admitted, that if you take Ukraine out of the possibility of NATO, just say there's no more NATO, it's just not going to happen, there won't be a war. If you keep it there, there's going to be a war. We didn't want to have that. We don't want anyone telling us what to do. If we want to tell Russia they're stupid and they're weak and that we're going to advance however far we want to in our defensive alliance, then that's good enough for you. It doesn't matter what we would do under similar circumstances. It only matters what we are telling you to do. And so we ignored that. We rejected it. We had the war. We still had another chance after that where Russia was still willing to have a negotiated settlement, and we almost had one in Istanbul, but no, we rejected that as well. So the war could have been over then, 1 month into it, 2 months at max. War could have been over. All this could be done, and we would be back to a status quo situation of peace and stability between the two sides. Even if not loving each other, there was stability. We could have had that gone forward. It could have been an ugly affair, but it would have been done. It would have been over. But no, we didn't want to have that. We wanted Russia to lose. It wasn't enough that we could reestablish security. That wasn't the objective. The objective was Russia has to lose. So we're going to keep going. We're going to keep fighting. And then the next opportunity came in 2023 when we had, as a result of the rejection of the 2022 opportunity, we put all of our eggs in the offensive basket for Ukraine, trained them, gave them intelligence, tanks, artillery, you name it, everything in the world. And they broke their teeth on the first of 5 Russian defensive lines. They never even got through that one fully. And all we did was just set the stage for more disaster. Again, we had an opportunity. We could have had a negotiated settlement under now much worse terms than would have been the case in Istanbul, but still the war could be over. Nope, we can't do that. And even though from that day, Ukraine has continued to go backwards to the west, Russia has gone forward, and they have succeeded, we still won't have a negotiated deal. We didn't take the one that came a year later in June 2024. And now then here we are again. And instead of saying, holy snap, all this stuff that we've done and all that wreckage I just described, let's come to a negotiated settlement and end this now. And instead, what does Mark Rutte do? What does the Western elites do? We can't learn from all of these lessons that have been painfully learned at the cost of much Ukrainian blood. We can't learn from the fact that our policies, and then you can add in all of the economic efforts, 19 rounds of sanctions, everything trying to crush Russia, none of it's worked. None of the military stuff has worked. They're now much stronger than they were in February 2022. And instead of saying, let's limit the damage and bring this to an end, the only thing that is sane and rational, instead, we're going to stay irrational and immoral, because it's immoral to continue to allow the Ukrainian people to play with extraordinary amounts of blood every day and the destruction, the physical destruction of both their future and their present on the ground. We're going to double down on that. And now then we have this speech here by the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Congratulations. You are now trying to cement all of the failures and build new ones. Except this one, at some point, if it keeps going along the path that it's going here, it's not just going to be the destruction of the country of Ukraine, but it's going to be into, you can expand into Poland, Romania, Italy, Germany, UK, France. Do you really want to bring that kind of destruction on them? Destruction that should never happen, and there's no reason to think that it's going to. That's where we are. That's where you're trying to take us. And the last point I want to make here from Rutte's statement is he has this just insane statement here that he's painting a picture of what will happen if we don't do what he's going to say. But understanding context of everything that I've told you in this episode right here, the image that he is describing here is what he will create for us if he has his way.
Conflicts are no longer fought at arm's length. Conflict is at our door. Russia has brought war back to Europe, and we must be prepared for the scale of war our grandparents and great-grandparents endured. Imagine it, a conflict reaching every home, every workplace. Destruction, mass mobilization, millions displaced, widespread suffering, and extreme losses.
That is shocking. That is insanity. He should be fired from his job for trying to lead us in that direction. Now, I understand that the other leaders in the alliance, the national leaders, are patting him on the back and encouraging him to go on. So they're in this all together. But he is the Secretary General and should be fired, because what he just described there is the future. He is sowing the seeds for us if we keep going down this path. Look at this horrible wreckage from the past that I just described to you. It's right there to be seen, not hidden, not twisting any facts around, just laying out the evidence that exists. The failures that we have had, the ability we could have gotten these things off the table, all these different points are still there. And as I said at the beginning, President Trump can still, forgive the pun, trump these guys by ending the support here. Because if the president of the United States says, y'all are crazy, you want to go to war with Russia, have at it. That's on you. Don't recommend it. We're not going to participate in your lunacy and insanity. We're out of this. You either make a negotiated settlement on the terms I'm willing to support, and we'll figure it out from there, or you keep going down this path and you can take yourselves into a war with Russia. We ain't going to do nothing about it. That's what he needs to do. And that's the one thing I think that has a chance to cut this off at the knees before it gets any further. Because if he just is passive and just lets things go along their own path, I mean, listen to me. I've been looking. I looked right before we came on here, and I haven't seen any specific Russian response so far. It's definitely coming, but there's no way that they're going to say, "Oh shoot, boy, I didn't see that coming." Okay, I guess we better just have a ceasefire right away and just let the Ukraine side have 800,000 troops and just make the current line of contact, and we'll just call it a day. I mean, I suspect that there are some that are insane enough on the Western side to think that as a possibility, and maybe they will do that. They won't. They are in the position of superiority and power right now, and then all you're going to do is cause them to go into fifth gear on their production capacity and make them have more plans for a war with Russia, with NATO. And believe me, they're starting from a position here. They were way down here in February 2022. They were not ready. And they spent 2 years getting ready, but now then they've had 2 additional years to get ready even further and to refine what they're doing. And now then they have all kinds of, their doctrine is better, their fighters are better, they have experience, their production capacity is through the roof. They have gone through a lot of iterations of drone warfare and electronic warfare, and they know what works, they know how to defend, etc. They have this nimbleness of mind that's been created in their military, none of which we have. None of which we have. If anything, if Russia was here in 2022, we're probably down here, maybe even lower than that, because we have this arrogance that we've had all this military experience and combat experience from 9/11 forward, not realizing that experience that we've had is almost counterproductive to this kind of warfare, and we're just not ready for it. So if we get into a clash, it's not going to be 5 years for most folks. Doug's talked about this a lot. He's written the book on this. It takes a full decade to really retool an army to be ready to fight in whatever is modern at the time it comes out. A decade. Germany's not going to be ready just because they add 80,000 troops to their active forces in 2 or 3 years from now. The UK, even if they somehow find the money to advance up to 3.5 or 5% total of defense spending, they're not in like by 2029, they're not going to suddenly be this combat capable force. They're just not going to be there. It just takes longer than that. And I'm talking sustained effort of somebody who's really doing the right thing and really trying to negotiate or train their forces, really modernizing their doctrine, and are, just cold-blooded on what works and what's reality, and shedding all of the arrogance and the institutional desires, et cetera, which are so difficult in peacetime to do. That's what it would take. But we won't. We're not going to do that. We're going to maintain the arrogance. So again, I fear that if President Trump doesn't pull his 800-pound gorilla action out and get us out of the way of this, Mark Rutte has set us, and along with all the other European leaders, they don't get a pass. They're setting us on a path to where we could literally see World War III, not because of something that's forced on us, but because something we eagerly and aggressively seek. That is the leadership we have in the West today, and something we desperately need to get fixed and off the table before everyone suffers in a war, just like what Rutte talked about there. That's where we're at. Appreciate it, folks. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.